And welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us again, or if it's your first time, welcome. Like Natalia said, my name is Joon. I'm the program manager here at the Alzheimer's Association New York City chapter, located right on 42nd Street in Manhattan. So very close. And today what we're going to talk about is living with Alzheimer's for caregivers, and we're going to talk about the middle stage. Right? I think 2 months ago, or was it last month? Can't remember the months anymore, but we did talk about the early stages. And now this is our part two, with also three parts of this one as well for the middle stage, right? I do like to ask, I think Natalia just put in the chat the contact information for PSS. But of course, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use either the Q&A button or the chat button for any questions. And we will definitely have time at the end to answer any questions. Great, so let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. And here we go. Alrighty, so again, right, this program is going to be in three parts, and throughout the entire three parts, right, and the completion of this program, so you're going to be able to learn about these objectives, right? So number one, list the symptoms and also the care needs associated with the middle stage of Alzheimer's disease. Number two, describe the relationship changes that occur in the middle stage. Number three, explain how caregivers can maximize safety, prepare for emergencies, and also access respite care. And number four, we're going to list strategies to provide personal care and manage challenging behaviors, right? And then in today's part one, right? So part one is going to be today. We're going to do part two next week, Friday, same time, and also part three at the same time as well, the week after that. But today's part one, what we're really going to talk about is we're going to talk about the symptoms of the middle stage. We're going to talk about communication. We're also going to talk about the relationship changes and providing personal care and also preparing for hospitalizations. Great, so let's go ahead and get started, right? So definitely I want to say within this middle stage, right, of Alzheimer's, that's where we start to see those gaps, right? In memory and thinking, that's going to become more noticeable, right? And then us individuals, we start to begin to see that with this person living with Alzheimer's dementia in the middle stage, right, they're going to need more help with those day-to-day activities, right? That could be including dressing, right? Helping them get into new clothes, maybe bathing, helping them to do, brush their teeth, right? Using the bathroom, etc., right? And usually by this point in the middle stage, that's where we also see that driving is no longer safe, and that risk of wandering probably has likely increased too, right? And of course, in the middle stage, we also do see, right, that there's personality, behavior, and also sleep patterns that might continue to change. And then caregivers are just going to need to assume that there is going to be a greater responsibility, especially when we're managing that personal care, right? Managing the finances and also decision making too, right? And of course, with this program, we're going to help you to provide those tools that you're going to need for the next steps. All right, but just to get a quick basis, right? So just really quickly laying the foundation of understanding Alzheimer's disease, right? Again, Alzheimer's disease causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior, right? And we also know that Alzheimer's disease, that is not a normal part of aging, right? If it was a normal part of aging, then we will all get it at one point, which we know is not true, right? However, there are so many different symptoms that could vary among individuals, right? Including memory loss, including wandering, including personality, emotional changes, right? Of course, not everyone's going to experience everything the same way, right? It's going to be very different for every individual, right? And of course, because Alzheimer's disease is a progressive disease, meaning that it does increasingly get worse and worse, unfortunately, as we get into the middle and late stages, right? We do see that disease leads to nerve cell death and tissue loss throughout the brain, which affects nearly all its functions, right? So that's why we typically see that now a lot of these abilities that they're able to do when they're at ease, right? Now they're not able to do these specific abilities or behaviors or also different, activities as easily as they were able to do in the early stages, right? All right. So when we're talking about the brain in the middle stage, right? So as that disease progresses, there's going to be different regions of the brain that gets affected and also is altered in many different ways, right? So each individual's progression is going to be different, like I said, right? No two people are going to go through this same way. So when we see the symptoms in the early stages, right, now those symptoms, they might become even more pronounced, right? And then, of course, right, with those difficulties, that might also increasingly interfere with maybe even family or social life too, right? And then also individuals, they might even have trouble remembering the names of family, friends, right? They might get more confused frequently, and then they might have more increased trouble with handling money, right? Expressing themselves, or even just organizing their thoughts too, right? So like the slide says, right, the disease, it progresses to other areas of the brain. It's how the brain changes will affect the person's symptoms. And of course, the new symptoms will affect the care that's going to be needed for this person. Oop, there we go. All right. So on this slide now, right, so here we do see that the Alzheimer's disease that begins in the part of the brain that first affects that new memory, right, our short-term memory, and then gradually spreads to the other parts of the brain, right? And one of those parts of the brain, that's called the frontal lobe, right, which is located in the part of the brain behind the forehead, right? So that's where we see in that region in the frontal lobe, right, personality, or organization, right, planning, behaviors, emotion, and all the other important functions. That's where it's controlled, right? Those things are controlled in the frontal lobe of the brain. And because of the damage to that frontal lobe, the person in the middle stage, they often do show those changes in personality and behavior first, right? And we also do see that speaking, also understanding the speech, right? Not just outwardly speaking, but also understanding speech that comes inwards, right? That's also affected as that disease damages those different temporal lobes where the language and also speech is also controlled in the brain, right? And of course, in the middle stage too, so the person's sense of where their body is in relation to different surrounding objects, different settings, right? That spatial relationship, judging distance, etc., right? That's also affected as well, right? And of course, depending on different types of healthy habits that they've accompanied throughout their life, right? That rate of progression that might also vary greatly depending on the person, right? So a person with Alzheimer's, they typically live an average of 48 years after that onset of symptoms. But we also do see that some people, they might actually survive up to 20 years more, right? So again, right, that course of that disease, that really depends on the parts of the person's age at diagnosis, right? Maybe even whether the person has other health conditions or even how far that disease had progressed by the time that person got diagnosed too, right? So when a person is in that middle stage of Alzheimer's, right, that damage to the brain, that can also make it difficult to remember, right, how to express those thoughts, right, perform routine tasks, right? You might even notice that the person is starting to jumble up words more often. They might have trouble buttoning a shirt, right? They might get more frustrated, more upset. They might act in very different ways, right? They might start refusing to bathe, right? They refuse to get into the bathroom with you to, do whatever you may need to do with them, right? So definitely, right? In that stage, we do see all these different symptoms, right? Memory decline, changes in behavior, increased trouble performing daily tasks, right? More prominent language problems. And also now we also see that there's a greater level of care that's going to be required for this person, right? Great. So as we're providing, increasing help for this person in the middle stage, right? We want to make sure that we're still going to maintain the person's self-esteem, right? And also their self-image, and also try to give them the most independence as possible, right? Again, just because there is the Alzheimer's in the brain for this person or not dementia in this person, right? That does not take away their sense of self, right? They're still there. They're still there, even if some abilities are diminishing, right? So we always want to make sure that we do respect them as a human being first, always, right? So self-esteem, self-image, independence, we want to maintain that as much as possible, right? So definitely, right, maintain the person's sense of self as you assist with daily care, activities, communication, eating, and bathing, right? These are all things that we might need to help them more now. Great. So, as a person with Alzheimer's disease, as they gradually lose their ability to find those words, right, and also express those thoughts, right, and also follow conversations, they might also have more trouble in understanding other people around them, right? So, with that, the ability to also, with another person, exchange our ideas, right, exchanging wishes, feelings, right, that's a basic need, right? So that gradual loss of these abilities is going to also be very difficult, especially for all those who's going to be involved in that caregiving too, right? So some other communication changes during the middle stage that can include, right, word finding, repetition, right, invention of new words, right, losing train of thought, maybe difficulty organizing different words into a sentence. Uh, we usually definitely, not definitely, sorry, we usually do see that if English is not their first language, they do actually revert back to their native language, right? Especially within the middle stage, and they might also more reliant on those nonverbal communications too, right? Lots of body language, like I do with my hands, right? They're going to rely more on that now in the middle stage. All right, definitely a number of those physical conditions and medications that could also affect a person's ability to communicate too, right? So of course, though, right, if we do see any sudden changes in their abilities, right, that's just happening so rapidly, we always want to be sure that we're going to consult with the doctor, right? Any sudden changes, that's already a big alarm to potentially, right, look into maybe side effects of new medication, right? Maybe there is a medical condition that's not being taken care of, right? We always want to consult with that doctor in case there are any curable or treatable conditions that can happen that can help ease those sudden changes too, right? Always get to keep that in mind. All right. So here we go. Here's our first video of the day. We got Mary O'Hara, who is a social worker at the Cognitive Neurology and Alzheimer's Disease Center at Northwestern University's School of Medicine, who's going to talk more about effective communication.
Well, some of the misconceptions I think about Alzheimer's disease in the middle stages are that a person is no longer capable of being part of a decision or making choices. And yes, their cognitive abilities are changing, and yes, they may be increasingly confused, but they can still participate in discussions and in decisions. And it's really up to us to adapt, whether it's the environment or the way that we're explaining something to them to help them participate in those decisions. So I think that is one common misconception, and it's an understandable one. The brain is such a difficult thing to understand, and this disease is such a difficult disease to understand. And so when we see someone experiencing these losses, we can easily make assumptions. Well, if they can't remember what they did this morning, they obviously can't be responsible for choosing where they would like to be living in a few years. And that's not necessarily the case. They can still participate. We just have to modify the we just have to modify how we present things and modify the environment so that they can participate.
Absolutely. I think, Mary, she brings up a good point, right? There's often misconceptions about the person's ability, right, in participating in those discussions, also decisions too, right? So it's really important that we don't make any assumptions about the person's ability to communicate as well, right? So we're definitely, as caregivers, we want to modify communication and the environment as necessary, just like Mary said. Right. So when we're communicating with a person in the middle stages, right, we want to make sure that we choose our words carefully, right? So of course, right, we want to, number one, identify yourself and also approach the person from the front and also at eye level, right? We want to definitely call the person by name, give that person a cue about your relationship, right? So for example, I could be talking to my dad with Alzheimer's, right? So we definitely want to approach them from the front. We don't want to tap them in the back again, right? Just because then if they're, if we accidentally startle them, that might induce a lot of potentially agitation, overstimulation, etc. Right? We don't want that. So we want to make a quick U-turn, right? Make a quick U-turn, approach them from the front, look at them in the eyes, right? Maintain eye contact and say, hey, Dad, this is your son, June, right? It's almost time for lunch. Do you want the ham sandwich that we made before, right? Kind of notice how I kind of cute about our relationship, right? This is your son, June, right? Might sound a little silly, right? But for a person with Alzheimer's dementia, right, this really does help to put where they are, right, and what this conversation is going to be about and with who. Right. Definitely, though, also when we are talking with a person, right, and communicating with them, we don't, when speaking, we want to make sure that we use short and simple words and also sentences too, right? We also don't want to overwhelm the person with any lengthy requests or stories. So definitely, we want to speak in that concise manner, also keep to the point as well, right? So definitely remember to talk slowly, right? Be clear with what you want to say and also be aware of that speed and also the clarity when we are speaking with this person, right? Right, breaking down instructions too, right? So when we're giving instructions, we want to break down tasks into more clear, simple steps, right? Give one step at a time, right? Make sure that we're not overwhelming them or also confusing the person with too many questions at once, right? One question at a time, give them some time, extra time to process your request or maybe your question, right? And then give them time and encouragement that they need to respond to, right? So for example, right, if I'm asking them, hey dad, it's time for lunch. Let's go to the kitchen. Do you want this a turkey sandwich, right? You're gonna give them maybe like 3 to 5 seconds, right? Then we're also gonna give them another 3 to 5 seconds for them to process, right? That was a little different than how we usually communicate, right? And on the daily basis, now we kind of need to change that up a little bit, right? We need to give a little extra time for them to process and for us to ask the questions too, right? We also want to turn questions into statements too, turning negatives into positives, avoid talking as if the person's not there, right? We don't want to exclude them again, right? We don't want to pretend that they're not there, and we're not going to talk for them, right, on behalf of decisions when they're right in front of us too, right? And of course, we also want to be aware of your tone of voice too, right? So, some other ways to enhance communication, right? Again, with the solution, providing the solution rather than the question, right? For example, instead of saying, right, the bathroom's right there, instead we want to maybe ask, right, do you need to use the bathroom, right? Maybe some clear expressions that could be, right, please come here, your shower's ready, instead of saying hop in, right? Hopping in, that might be a little bit more confusing for the person rather than saying, hey, your shower is ready, right? Please come here, right? They might interpret it as a literal instruction. They might just start hopping too, right? We don't want that. So we want to be very direct, right? Maybe using specific words. And also, again, we're going to use our hand gestures too, our body language, right? So saying, uh, instead of saying, here it is, I might want to say, hey, Dad, here's your hat, right? And we're going to point to the hat or maybe even pick it up too, right? So it's just small things like this that helps make this communication as best as possible, make it as simple as possible, and most directly as possible too. Oops, here we are. So slide this one. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So as the disease progresses, right, so roles and those relationships will also change too, which is what we're going to talk about on this slide, right? That relationship changes in the middle stage too. So, the person, they might no longer be able to perform certain tasks, right? Such as maybe balancing checkbook, right? Doing taxes, right? Dressing appropriately too, or even dressing themselves, maybe even bathing, right? So you and other, family members, friends, right? You will need to take on some of these responsibilities, maybe line up other resources to do that, right? Of course, right? We want to make sure that we, you know, have that resources, right? Maybe turning to family and friends, right, for that assistance. And of course, right, we want to make sure that levels of stress may increase, but with the help of those within the care team, we can hopefully make sure that at least some levels of stress can decrease, especially as caregivers. So not only does that Alzheimer's disease affect your relationship with the person with the disease and also with family members, it also does affect social relationships too, right? So we want to be honest with people about the person's diagnosis, right, and what may be currently happening as a result of that disease too, right? So that can also definitely help those close to you, right, understand how that disease is affecting both you as a caregiver and also them as a person living with the disease too, right? So definitely, when some people think of this disease, right, they just assume that life is over when that disease is made, diagnosis is made, right? But it's really important to emphasize with family and friends that diagnosis of Alzheimer's, that does not mean that there isn't still life to be lived, right? We want to educate people in your social circle about what they can expect. So even coming to education programs like this one, right? Describing the symptoms, knowing what behavior changes and how to best communicate with the person, right? And spreading that amongst those who might not know mostly about this disease, right? That can help put them into perspective on what this disease looks like for you as a caregiver and also for the person living with dementia and also for themselves too, right? Definitely, right? Social relationships, stigma can influence perceptions and relationships. We also want to educate those close to you about the disease. We also want to take the initiative to contact family and friends about this as well. Great. So this next slide, so if you are caring for a spouse or partner, right, in the middle stage of Alzheimer's disease, that could also bring some significant relationship changes, right? It's typical for both partners to experience changes in the way that they relate to each other as well, right? It's also common for people with Alzheimer's disease to also experience changes in sexual drive as well, right? Also potentially depression, that could also cause a reduced risk in sexual needs as well. And some caregivers, they do report changes in sexual feelings towards their partner as a result of providing that daily care, right? So conversely, though, the progression of disease might also cause a person to exhibit some inappropriate behaviors or an increased sexual drive, right? Maybe forgetfulness, that loss of inhibition, sometimes confusion or boredom, right? That might also contribute to that as well, right? There might be some confusion about who's who, right? That might result in calling maybe an adult child by the spouse's name and then interacting with that person accordingly, right? So, sometimes it might feel difficult with that, but, all these behaviors are dealt with most comfortably by remembering that, this is a function of the disease, not as a person themselves, right? And of course, there's many ways to deal with these issues, right? And of course, no single approach works for everyone in all situations, right? But we want to definitely react to your person with patience and also gentleness too, right? Maybe giving them plenty of physical contact with hugs, right? Or by holding hands, right? In many cases, that person, they might just be anxious and they just need reassurance through touch and gentle, loving communication too, right? So remember that regardless of that nature of the relationship with the person with dementia, right? Expressions of that closeness and love, that's really important for everyone. So really engage in those simple activities, right? Or simple physical expressions of closeness, right? That's really important. And we don't want to take that away just because there is Alzheimer's in the talks, right? Great. So structure and routine, those are very important, especially in the middle stage, right? It can be super helpful to just really write a plan for each day, right? Maybe having a schedule for each day, right? And having a planned day that can allow you to spend less time and also less energy in trying to figure out, right, what to do from moment to moment, right? In some instances, that plan for the day that might include maybe respite care, adult day programs, or maybe companions or friends coming to the home, right? So think of those activities as the things we do each day, right? Rather than trying to invent new ideas, right? So for example, right, making dinner for the family, right? Maybe if they were a big gardener, right? Tending to the flowers, gardening together, right? Going for a walk together, right? These are all activities, right? That's just incorporated in everything that we do each day, right? So definitely look for those opportunities to include that person living with dementia or Alzheimer's in activities that you both do enjoy, right? So, if you do typically like taking a walk, right, a daily walk, you can walk together, right? Do stuff together. Of course, with any activities, again, we want to break that down into simple tasks, right? So, for example, I'm going to take that example of gardening that we just talked about, right? You want to break that activity down into, smaller steps, right? Maybe first talking about your garden plan, right? Then step number two, maybe making a list of the seeds that we need to buy, right? Number three is buying the seeds. Step number four is helping the person get the tools and put on gardening gloves. Right? And then step number five, right, helping the person dig those holes for the seeds. And then, of course, we want to provide that hand over hand assistance, right? Maybe holding their hands as they're, shoveling the dirt, right? Want to provide that too. Of course, right? Having those kinds of activities and doing it step by step together, right, that's still able to help that person maintain that sense of self, right? Again, that person's sense of self is still going to be there throughout the disease, right? And we want to make sure that we also maximize the independent functioning too, right? We also want to keep in mind that the goal is to help the person stay productive and also independent rather than accomplishing a task thoroughly and perfectly, right? Sometimes we got to throw perfect out the window. Okay? It's more about how you're doing this with the person and how they're feeling independent versus the perfection that's going to come out at the end of the activity, right? Again, we want to give them a sense of purpose. And we want to give that connection, right? So make those activities flexible, right? All right. So here's Melanie, who is the Vice President of Program Services at the Alzheimer's Association's Greater Illinois chapter, and she's going to talk about the roles of activities in the life of the person with dementia. So here we go.
What's really important is to remember that if you've got an artistic background, if you're an artist or a musician, or if you've been an actor, that those are things that are so deeply ingrained in you. And as you develop dementia, you may not be able to engage in them the same way you used to. You may not be able to pick up your instrument and play an entire sonata or something. But to be able to have the opportunity to enjoy music if you're a musician is still really important. So family members need to remember that maybe the person can't play the way that they used to, but maybe they'd really enjoy going to a concert, or maybe they'd enjoy learning how to play a different instrument. When I was a music therapist, I used to work with people who had been professional musicians and couldn't play their instruments the same way that they used to. And one of the things that I did with them that was lots of fun for me and for the person was either adapting the way that they played the instrument, simplifying arrangements if they played piano, say, or finding other instruments that they might be able to play that would be a little easier to learn because you've still got that musical ability. What's so important, though, to remember is if you have a family member that's been artistic in any way, giving them the opportunity to engage somehow in artistic pursuits is just so important.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, right? So just kind of bouncing off what Melanie said, right? You know, artistic tendencies, those are really well integrated, right? You know, even if that person's abilities changed, right, we want to make sure that those activities can be adapted to tap into those artistic interests too, right? So we always want to give that person opportunities, excuse me, to engage in those artistic pursuits as well, right? Great, thank you, Melanie. All right, so in the middle stage, right, also caregivers, they might need to begin assisting that person with those different personal care tasks, right? That includes bathing, that includes brushing your teeth, right? Maybe dressing again, right? Going to the bathroom, eating, right? These are all different tasks that they might need help. And that helps begins with, different reminders and, progresses to, doing tasks with and also for that person too, right? In addition, right, getting confused, disoriented, and also lost in familiar surroundings, that also increases at this stage. So we want to make sure that there's an increased supervision uh, that's required to reduce that risk of wandering too, right? And of course, sometimes a person, they might become frustrated doing tasks, right? That was once easy to them, but now it's getting a lot more difficult for them, right? Difficulties that that person has with the following steps at that point, right, in the progression of disease that often leads to the increased challenges with daily activities, right? And confusion that might also increase at certain times of day. And of course, that poor memory and also increased confusion that might also lead to that frustration and agitated behavior in them as well. So talk about meal times, right? So proper nutrition that can also keep that body strong and healthy, but regular nutritious meals that might become more difficult for people with dementia, right? So mealtime challenges that I've heard a lot about too, that can include, right? One, maybe getting overwhelmed with too many food choices, right? Maybe forgetting to eat or thinking that they already have eaten, right? Even if they didn't. Maybe there's poor appetite or loss of interest in food, right? Or they maybe forget how to eat, right? So some tips for mealtime that can include, right, making sure that we make meal times calm and comfortable, right? Serving meals in quiet surroundings, away from the television and from other distractions, right? We also want to maybe keep the table setting simple with maybe high color contrast to avoid overstimulation, right? And make things easy to see, right? So of course, if you are having some problems during meal times, maybe you want to think, right, is the problem physical? Maybe they have sores in their mouth. Maybe there's poorly fitting dentures, or maybe they're missing some dentures, right? Or maybe even dry mouth. That could also help, that could also make eating difficult too. Maybe you want to think, right, does this person have other chronic illnesses, or is the person taking medication that might lead to that loss of appetite, right? Maybe there is a side effect of a new medication, right? Constipation, also indigestion, that can also decrease appetite as well, right? Maybe you want to think, is that person agitated or distracted, right? If they're agitated, the problem is that the person probably won't sit long enough to eat an entire meal, right? So we always want to make sure, we want to think, how can we reduce those distractions and create a calming atmosphere, right? Maybe they recently changed eating styles or routines, right? Maybe the person has a preferred eating pattern, right? Some people might not be accustomed to sitting down at the table for 3 full meals, right? Maybe they prefer to have several small meals or snacks throughout the day, right? Maybe it might be also, right, the silverware, right? Maybe they have trouble with the silverware, right? So maybe finger food can be the other great option to help, the person living with disease retain that independence, right? So really think about all these different questions that could come up, especially when we're talking about, challenges with meal times, right? And try to work around that. Also within the middle stage with grooming, right? So at some point, there might be reminders to bathe and groom, right? That's not going to be enough anymore. Right? So the person, they might even forget how to comb their hair, brush their hair, right? They might forget how to clip their fingernails, right? Maybe they have difficulty with, toothbrush or nail clippers, or maybe even comb, right? So that's where caregivers, they can step in and they can help maintain those grooming routines for that person, right? Maybe if they go to the beauty salon or barber, right? Continue that comfortable routine, right? If the experience becomes overwhelming, maybe consider asking the barber or the hairstylist to come to the person's home, right? Or find one that could come to the person's home, right? We want to definitely respect the preferences of the person with dementia by providing those, different favorite toiletries or things that they've always been using and is very familiar with them, right? And of course, it can also sometimes help to brush or comb your own hair and then encourage the person to copy your motions after seeing you do it to your own self, right? Some things to think about. Alrighty. Dental care. So proper dental care that can also help prevent those eating difficulties and also digestive problems and also maybe extensive dental procedures in the future, right? But of course, toothbrushing, that could become sometimes difficult because they might forget how to brush or even why it's important, right? So maybe to assist that person with brushing their teeth, right, we want to provide that short, simple instructions, right? Uh, just saying to them, like, brush your teeth, right? That by itself might be too non-specific, right? So it might help to break down again each of those steps by saying, right, number one, okay, let's hold your toothbrush, put the toothbrush in their hand, and then firmly grasp it with your hand too, right? And then we're gonna tell them, put the toothpaste on the brush, right? And maybe help them put the toothpaste on the brush, right? And then we break it down even further, saying, okay, now it's time to brush your teeth with your toothbrush, right? So now we're kind of doing these steps, right, in many different steps, like breaking it down, right? Maybe even using a different technique that I call a watch me technique, right? So a watch me technique is like holding a brush and showing the person how to brush their teeth, right? Doing it first before they watch you to do it, and then also putting your hand over the person's hand and then gently guiding the brush, right? That could also help too. And of course, we do want to monitor mouth care daily, right? So definitely if they have dentures, we want to make sure that they do remove and clean the dentures every night, right? Gently brush the person's gums, tongue, and also roof of mouth, etc. Alrighty. So using the bathroom, right? Many people with dementia, they have a loss of bladder or bowel movement. Bladder movement control, right? Which is also called incontinence. Some possible causes that can also include the inability to recognize those natural urges, right? That might be due to those changes again in the brain, right? Maybe even forgetting, right? What is that urge that I have in my stomach that's telling me, oh, I need to use the bathroom, right? That might slowly go away, right? Maybe they forget where the bathroom is located, or maybe there might be side effects from another medication, right? Again, whenever there is medication involved, we want to make sure that we have the doctor rule out any medical problems as the cause, right? Especially if if there are any sudden changes in that bladder or bowel patterns. Also, UTIs, urinary tract infections, those are also very common too, and that can also cause and provide that dramatic behavior changes too, right? So, for example, right, with the person living with Alzheimer's or dementia who might have those UTIs, might see them going back and forth, pacing a lot, right? Or maybe they're going to the bathroom even more frequently, like maybe every 10 minutes or 20 minutes, right? That might be a sign that there is a UTI. And we definitely want to make sure that we get that checked out as soon as possible, right? Great. Okay, so assisting the person to the bathroom, right? We want to make sure that we want to remove the obstacles from the path to the bathroom so that we prevent falls, right? And it makes the room easier to access, right? Making sure that we do have a clear path. I know some people, they've also included like a big sign that says bathroom, in front of the bathroom door, right? Or maybe there's arrows in the hallways that tells you where the bathroom is too, right? So we want to definitely play with that, right? Make sure that according to their abilities that we kind of alter that environment, right? We want to make sure that the person's clothing is also easy to remove too, to reduce those accidents, right? There are clothing that is specific for dementia, people living with dementia. So definitely look into that. Making sure that again, we want to, you know, use reminders for those, right? Again, the signs or pictures of the bathroom or toilets, right, in front of the bathroom door, right? Maybe at night we leave the bathroom light on and the door open, right? So that if they have to use the bathroom at night, that they're not confused and potentially have an accident, right? We also want to make sure that sometimes we maybe use colored rugs on the bathroom floor, maybe even colored toilet lids to help make the toilet stand out for them. Right? Sometimes if, typically, at least for my bathroom in my apartment, the toilet is white and also the walls are white too, right? But by having maybe a very brightly colored bathroom mats under the toilets, and also change your toilet lid to be a different color, that can help make that toilet stand out for that person, right? So definitely we want to monitor that as well. Oops. There you go. So bathing, right? Bathing, hygiene and bathing, or maybe even showering, right? That might become more difficult as the disease also progresses too, right? So once, even though we give them reminders, that might not be any more, no longer adequate, right? So we want to consider that person's abilities and also encourage them to do as much as possible, right? And of course, you may wish to be ready to assist when needed. So we want to assess their ability to find the bathroom, right? See clearly, make sure that they're also able to keep their balance without falling, right? Maybe reach and stretching their arms, remembering the steps in the bathing process and following cues or examples, right? We want to know how to use those various products, including soap, shampoo, the washcloth, etc. And of course, we want to sense that water temperature too, right? And in many families, they find at this point, this is the point of the disease at which they bring in additional help for the person with Alzheimer's disease, right? So maybe an aide, right, may come in to assist only with bathing, right? And it's really important to keep in mind that there is no risk to the person if they do not bathe every day, right? So again, making sure that we keep that in mind, and also maybe potentially bringing in an aide. Would be careful though, sometimes if they're not the same, gender as the person who is bathing, right, they might become more reluctant. So making sure that we communicate that with the with the aid agency, that can also really help, especially when we are talking about, things like bathing. All right, dressing. So helping the person with dementia maintain their appearance, right? By providing the least amount of hands-on assistance needed, right? That also helps with their independence too, right? Of course, choosing and putting on clothing, that could be frustrating for the person with dementia, right? As they might not remember how to dress, or they might be overwhelmed with those choices, right? So we always want to make sure that we simplify those choices and choose clothes that are easy to put on, right? And maybe even providing that subtle direction by laying out clothing in the order which they need to put on, right? Maybe laying it out on the bed from left to right, right? Handing the person one item at a time, maybe while giving those short, specific instructions, right? So for example, rather than saying, let's get dressed, maybe we could say, first, let's put your arm in this sleeve. Once I do that, all right, now let's put your arm in this sleeve. Okay, we got this on. Now it's time to change your pants. So we're gonna take off one side of your leg. Okay, we're gonna take the other side of your leg. All right, now we gotta kind of have to do it step by step rather than all at once. So definitely, again, simplifying those instructions and also giving those step by step instructions as well. Excuse me. Sorry. We also want to choose simple and comfortable clothing that's really easy to work with, right? Such as cardigans, maybe pullover tops, sweatpants that don't require buttons or zippers, right? Maybe another option is to substitute Velcro for buttons, right? Substitute Velcros for those buttons and zippers that might be difficult for them to handle, right? Making sure that the person has comfortable and non-slip shoes to prevent falls, right? And again, like I said before, I know there are like dementia-specific clothing that you could also buy. I believe last time I checked, they were also on Amazon too, but there are specific stores that specifically sell dementia-related clothing, right? Which eliminates a lot of the, again, the zippers, the snaps, the buttons, right? And they're mostly Velcro or mostly pullover. All right. So here's the next video, Hazel. So Hazel's husband has Alzheimer's disease, and she's going to describe the techniques that she uses to help her husband get dressed each day.
In terms of his daily living activities, he is unable to, he chooses his clothes, but they're very inappropriate at times for the season. He will wear a flannel shirt in the summer, and in the winter, he might want to go out in khaki pants. He just sometimes reverses the seasons. He needs to be prodded in terms of changing clothes, or I have to get the shirt or the slacks in the evening, because once they're on, they're not going to be changed. So certainly his ability to wash his face, he is lost. I have to write down instructions about how to do that, how to shave. He can still take a shower on his own, he still shaves on his own, he still brushes his teeth, he still can wash his face, but he needs the cues. And so we have index cards that he follows.
Absolutely. So Hazel kind of described, right, that Alzheimer's disease that might affect the person's judgment regarding dressing as well as the ability to complete the process, right? So we always want to encourage independence by providing the cues and also providing instructions while allowing the person to dress themselves if possible too. Great. So next, right, in the middle stages, right, when we're talking about trips to hospitals, that can be very particularly stressful, right? And of course, that combination of maybe an unfamiliar surrounding and also interactions with strangers that can also make a hospital stay frightening for the person with Alzheimer's disease as well, right? But of course, we want to prepare in advance to help reduce that stress for both you and for the person living with dementia as well. So we want to make sure that we plan for hospitalization before it even happens, right? So definitely think about those who might offer that support and really identify that support team in advance, right? So think about who will support you, right? For packing emergency bags for both of you, and also making sure that we do bring needed documents and making sure they're up to date all the time, right? So that includes maybe copies of insurance cards, power of attorney documents, advance directives, right? Maybe an information package about current medications, allergies, contact information, etc. Right? We want to make sure that we have all of this in case of an emergency too. Right? That could also include, in case of emergency, could also include, right? Maybe change of clothes, incontinence supplies if used, right? Comforting objects, right? That's always, I like to always encourage that, right? That can include pictures of families, right? Maybe different music that they've always listened to, right? We want to make sure that they're having those objects that they're as most comfortable as possible in any setting possible. Of course, working with hospital staff, right? So techniques that have helped families at the hospital work with staff, right? Letting their staff know what the person's baseline looks like, right? Letting them know what type of symptoms have come up, letting them know what has worked for the person to help them calm down, what might distress them, etc. Right? And we also want to include the person's routine as much as possible. right? Also, we don't want to talk to medical staff in front of the person in case if, want to make sure, right? Sorry, when needed, right? Remind staff members not to speak in front of the person with dementia as if they're not present, is what that means, right? That could let the person feel like they're being left out or demeaned too, right? So if you do receive any confusing information, right, definitely attempt to speak to the person, right, separately, right, as so not to maybe upset or confuse a person for whom you're providing care for. Right? Of course, always ask the person to staff it to explain, monitor care, and also, of course, advocate for the person with dementia too. All righty. So here's our, before we end part one of our series, here's our contact information. We have our website, alz.org. We also have our 24/7 helpline, 1-800-272-3900. Again, that's available all day, every day, so you can call anytime, day or night, to talk with a mass level clinician, social workers, care consultants, to just really talk about, creating an action plan, or if you don't know what to do, they'll help you guide you through that. If you just need emotional support, that can also be done too through this helpline. So definitely take this helpline in. And ways to get involved, that includes walk to end Alzheimer's, the longest stay, volunteering, advocacy, and also trial match as well. Great. So I know we're 2 minutes before 11. I do want to have some time for any questions. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Does anybody have any questions for me? Let me also check the chat box. While we're talking about questions, so our next time that we're going to be here, right, we're going to talk more about maximizing safety and also preparing for those emergencies. We're going to talk more about what we just talked about in the first part, right? And then next, in the part 3, we're going to list those effective ways to provide personal care, also managing those challenging behaviors too. Any questions?
And I have one for you. I have a follow-up question. You mentioned earlier on in terms of, I think, like eating is like a big deal and sometimes we want to negotiate. How do you recommend, like, I thought immediately of like if the person living with dementia might benefit from choices, or is that too much? Like saying, would you like to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or mac and cheese? Would giving them those options be too much, or just saying like, are you ready for lunch? What would you recommend?
Actually, that's a very good question. I actually get that question a lot with caregivers. So definitely, we don't want to make an open question, right? It just helps to have those two choices, right? Again, peanut butter sandwich or mac and cheese. Most likely, I want to say maybe like around 70%. If you're more willing to make mac and cheese, I would put the mac and cheese as the first choice.
Okay.
More times than not, they usually choose the first choice over the second choice. But by providing those kind of like those cues, right, versus having an open-ended question, that might confuse them even more, and it might just take even more time for them to decide on their own, and potentially they might get lost in their thoughts, and then now we're going to go back to square one about asking them again, right? So by providing those choices, if they don't like any of those two choices, then we could keep doing the two choices, right? Okay, so you didn't want peanut butter or mac and cheese. Would you like a turkey sandwich or maybe pasta? All right. Then we could keep going on with that until they finally find something. Right?
Yeah. And would you
So-
say the same thing with like, I'm just thinking of someone that I know personally that like likes to dress.
Oh,
So like giving them choices, especially like if they don't know how to dress for the season, right? Or is
right.
that again, like are choices just much better, like maybe laying out 2 sets of sweaters and letting them pick? Or again, is that too much? Like again, what do you recommend?
I would say yes. For the clothing, I always recommend, right, scheduling like the clothing kind of in a way for the week, right? Because then if they all of a sudden, they see something else in sight, oh, so sorry. So sorry about that. We just got an earthquake.
Yes.
Yes, so sorry about that, everyone. Um,
Yes, earlier it
but,
shook and I didn't know if it was like my seating area, but we were shaking for a good 5 seconds, so I have been distracted ever since.
I have to admit, I was a little taken aback when it was shaking. My computer was shaking too. Going back to the question, sorry everyone. Going back to the question, right? Having scheduled clothing that could really help again, right? So maybe taking time on Sunday evening or maybe Sunday morning if they're more responding to morning time to lay out the clothing and label it Monday's clothing, Tuesday's clothing, Wednesday's clothing. That can help. Also, they're building their independence on choosing the clothing, right? And then making sure that we also have um, kind of like, I want to say very simple clothing too, that can also really help when choosing clothing. Just because then if one clothing suddenly gets dirtied up, and if we have something very similar to that one, then we can kind of ease them into that clothing versus having, too many options, I feel like. That makes sense?
Right.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you. We are a little over time. Do we have any additional questions for June? I think as we continue with the topic, I'm sure additional questions will come up.
If you have any questions, you could also reach out to me directly through email. I did put my email in the chat. So definitely reach out to either me or Natalia and we'll see what we can do.
Well, if there are no further questions, just want to wish everybody a happy and exciting Friday, I guess, with an earthquake. Please be sure to take care of yourselves. Remember, you cannot take care of your loved one if you are not taking care of yourself. And please join us next week for part 2 of this series. So, and please also be on the lookout for follow-up email. I'll also share June's information there. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see each other next Friday, same time, same place. Have a great rest of your Friday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Natalia.
Bye.